I froze mid-step, arms still open, as my daughter leaned in and hissed, "Don't hug me in public, you smell old." She said it with a smile, like cruelty was just style now. My grandson blinked up at me, caught between loyalty and silence. I buttoned my cardigan like nothing cracked. But that was the moment I rewrote my will and removed my only child. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Delilah Moore parked her car in the farthest corner of the gravel lot behind the cafe, easing her Subaru into the only shaded spot beneath an old sugar maple. The August sun had begun its slow climb, casting a pale gold sheen across downtown Boise. She sat for a moment, letting the engine click itself quiet, her hand resting lightly on the steering wheel as if it still needed her. She reached into her leather tote for a compact mirror, adjusted a loose strand of hair from her silver chignon, and applied a touch of rose lipstick. The soft click of the mirror closing echoed in the still cabin. With a quiet exhale, she stepped out, tugging her cardigan, light gray cashmere, across her shoulders, though the day didn't ask for warmth. She didn't mind the walk. It gave her a few extra moments of peace before she faced her daughter. The cafe sat nestled between a garden store and a Pilates studio, its patio strung with fairy lights that sparkled even in daylight. Umbrellas shaded delicate wrought iron tables, and conversations fluttered around like lazy birds. Delilah spotted them easily. Cassie had claimed a prime corner table, of course, shaded just enough to protect her complexion, but sunny enough to catch the attention of passers-by. She sat with one leg crossed over the other in her usual picture-perfect posture, her sunglasses perched like a statement of superiority rather than necessity. Miles sat beside her, shoulders rounded inward, a teenage boy's effort to take up as little space as possible. Delilah approached with the kind of smile she reserved for Sunday mornings and graduation photos, warm, full of intent, and meant entirely for Miles. "There's my handsome young man," she said, opening her arms in welcome. Cassie stood partially, the kind of social rise that showed effort without commitment. She leaned slightly in, offering her cheek, and as Delilah drew close, Cassie muttered just under her breath, her tone perfectly polite to anyone listening nearby, "Don't hug me in public, you smell old." The words landed like a slap wrapped in satin. Delilah froze for the briefest second. Her arms paused midair, then drifted down with a softness that made it look like she'd merely changed her mind. She touched her cardigan at the shoulders, adjusted it with slow precision, and gave a small nod before sitting down across from them. Miles stared at his mother, eyes wide with something like disbelief. "Mom," he began, his voice tentative, but she cut him off with a tight smile. "Good, you made it," Cassie said breezily, lifting her water glass. "We already ordered coffees. Yours is decaf, obviously." Delilah met her grandson's gaze for a beat longer than usual, something unspoken passing between them. She turned her attention to the server who arrived just then, balancing a tray with 3 mugs and a tiny vase of wildflowers. "We have a seasonal elderflower spritz if anyone's interested," he offered, placing cups down gently. Cassie laughed lightly, eyes never leaving her phone screen. "Elderflower, how fitting." Delilah said nothing. She reached for her cup and sipped with quiet grace. The conversation was dominated by Cassie's running monologue, a potential brand deal with a collagen company, an idea for a joint mother-daughter Instagram series, and a passing comment about how Miles needed to start networking. Every word seemed curated for an audience that wasn't there. When Delilah asked about his upcoming biology project, Miles lit up briefly. But as soon as he mentioned a topic that didn't align with Cassie's preferred optics, soil composition, not marine pollution, she redirected. "I just think it's better to focus on something visually engaging. You know, for your college apps," she said, dabbing at the corner of her mouth like an executive folding a memo. The server returned with the check. Cassie didn't look up as she slid it toward her mother, her freshly manicured nails tapping twice on the receipt folder. "Would you mind covering? I'm between client invoices." Delilah didn't flinch. "Of course," she said gently, as if it were already assumed. Outside, the sun had shifted high overhead, throwing sharp shadows across the brick-lined sidewalk. Cassie air-kissed the air near her mother's cheek and walked toward her BMW without waiting for a goodbye. Miles lingered behind, adjusting the strap on his backpack, his expression conflicted. "You still picking me up Tuesday?" he asked, his voice low. Delilah gave a small, reassuring nod. "I'll make the peach cobbler." His lips twitched into something like a smile, though his eyes still carried the weight of what had happened. Then he turned and followed his mother, who was already backing out of the parking space without a glance in the rearview mirror. Delilah remained standing by the host stand for a few moments longer, the sounds of brunch fading into background haze. She opened her phone and scrolled past the recent photos, peach trees, library shelves, Miles holding a book to his chest, until a text buzzed in from Nina. "Nina, how did brunch with Royal Highness go?" Delilah stared at the message. For a moment her thumb hovered without response. Then she typed, slow and deliberate, "Delilah, I won't forget it." She hit send, closed her phone, and began walking slowly back to her car, her shoes clicking softly against the pavement. Behind her, a lavender sprig slipped from the folds of her cardigan and fluttered to the sidewalk, unnoticed, but not unimportant. 3 days after the brunch, Delilah stepped off the main street and ducked behind the Co-op bookstore, where a narrow, cobbled path opened into a small courtyard most people didn't know existed. Ivy curled up the brick walls, and the scent of old paper from the used bookstore mingled faintly with blooming jasmine that Clara insisted on coaxing through every season. The perfumery didn't have a sign, just a navy door with a brass handle and a frosted window etched with the outline of a moth. Inside, the air felt different, not just cooler, but slower. Delilah exhaled, the door clicking shut behind her, and let the space pull the tension from her shoulders. Clara stood behind a small counter, decanting something amber into a glass vial. Her dark curls were pinned loosely, safety glasses perched on her head like a crown of practicality. "Delilah," she said, not looking up, "you're early." Delilah moved through the space slowly, passing trays of dried florals and shelves of small, handwritten labels. The room smelled like memory, but also like something that hadn't happened yet. "I didn't want to think too much," Delilah replied. "If I'd sat with it, I might have talked myself out of coming." Clara capped the bottle and turned. "You're not a woman who talks herself out of things." Delilah smiled faintly. "I'm not a woman who changes things either. Until now." Clara gestured to the small velvet stool by the center table. "So, are we blending or are we burying?" Delilah sat, smoothing her skirt with care. "A little of both." Clara moved like a painter now, reaching for tiny bottles and dropping oils one at a time onto a porcelain strip. A hint of green fig first, bright and sharp, then something dusky and grounded. "Lavender," Clara said aloud, though mostly to herself. "Not the kind from sachets," Delilah added, "the kind that grows beside a warm sidewalk. Sharp. Alive." Clara met her eyes. "Got it." She moved with precision, adding the final note, sandalwood, clean and warm, like the inside of a well-worn drawer. She waved the strip lightly through the air before offering it across the table. Delilah closed her eyes, breathing in deeply. "It's not sweet," she said. "I like that." "It's not apologizing for anything," Clara replied. "That's the point." Delilah looked out the window at the vines clinging to the brick wall. "Fresh start?" Clara asked. Delilah shook her head gently. "Final draft?" Clara smiled and began bottling the blend. 2 evenings later, Delilah sat on her porch swing, the air still warm enough to leave the windows open. Miles sat at her feet, cross-legged on the wooden floorboards, fiddling with the cord of his earbuds. He looked up suddenly, sniffed the air and tilted his head. "You smell like spring," he said. Delilah laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt like a knot untying somewhere in her chest. "It's new," she said. "A little gift to myself." "I like it," he said without hesitation. "It smells real." She reached down and gently brushed a curl from his forehead. "So do you, sweetheart." Later that week, Nina dropped by, her arms full of nasturtiums and indignation. "She's charging you for brunch now?" Nina huffed, pulling out her phone and holding it up with 2 fingers like it was contaminated. A Venmo request for half the bill, and she didn't even let you finish your coffee. Delilah held out her hand, took the phone calmly, and stared at the screen. Cassie Moore, $18.75, half of brunch. She handed the phone back. Well, that explains the smiley face. I thought she'd chipped a tooth. Nina burst out laughing and then leaned in slightly, sniffing the air around Delilah's collarbone. Okay, wait a minute, she said. What is that? Green fig, lavender, sandalwood. Nina raised an eyebrow. Well, not everyone's nose is broken, at least. Delilah said nothing, just smiled softly and took another sip of her tea, the scent wrapping around her like a quiet kind of defiance. As the sun dipped lower, painting the porch in golden shadow, her phone vibrated once. Cassie Moore, reminder, brunch split. Delilah didn't respond. Instead, she picked up the small glass bottle Clara had given her, held it to the light, and studied the pale green liquid inside. She rose from her chair, walked to the kitchen, and opened the drawer where she kept her will. With a deliberate hand, she tucked the bottle beside it. The first time it happened, Delilah didn't even have her shoes on. She was in the middle of blanching green beans when the doorbell rang, 3 hurried chimes followed by a text. Cassie, dropping Miles, last-minute Pilates switch, be back before 6-ish. When Delilah opened the front door, Miles stood there, backpack slouched off one shoulder, earbuds dangling, a half-eaten protein bar in his hand. Hey, Grandma, he said, already stepping inside like this was routine. Delilah blinked once, then held the door open wider. Well, come on in, sweetheart. Let's get you a real lunch. It became a pattern, but not one anyone ever discussed. Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. Miles appeared without announcement or apology. Sometimes there was a text, sometimes not. Occasionally, a half-hearted honk from the curb when Cassie returned, but more often, Miles would gather his things quietly and walk out to the car waiting at the end of the drive. Delilah adjusted. She rearranged her grocery lists to include extra fruit, almond milk, and protein waffles. She shifted her afternoon reading hours into late evening. She kept spare pencils in the kitchen drawer and a dry erase board on the fridge where she wrote down his assignments and his reminders, since no one else seemed to. The thank you never came. Not in texts, not in voice, not in flowers, not in anything, just more time taken and assumed. One Thursday afternoon, his 3rd visit that week, Delilah received a message while stirring turkey chili on the stove. Cassie, can you feed him something organic? He's been puffy lately. Delilah read the words twice before locking her phone, wiping her hands, and opening the drawer where she kept extra birthday cards and stationery. Instead, she pulled out an unused red leather notebook, its cover still stiff from disuse. She opened to the first page and wrote in neat script, Wednesday, arrived, 2:08 p.m., math tutoring, 45 minutes, grocery run for spiral notebooks, $8.79. Dinner prep, 1.5 hours. Departure, 6:17 p.m. She underlined the date and closed the book carefully, her breath steady, her expression unreadable. Honestly, Nina said the following weekend, helping Delilah prune the wilting basil near the porch rail, you should start invoicing her like one of those nanny apps. Delilah chuckled, though it sounded more like an exhale. She wouldn't read the invoice. She'd just Venmo half and call it gratitude. Nina shook her head. She's squeezing you like a free rideshare with snacks. You ever notice she doesn't ask if you're available? Just assumes? Delilah snipped another basil stem, careful to leave the younger leaves intact. Assumptions are easier than apologies. Nina looked up. So what are you going to do? Delilah didn't answer immediately. She took her clippers and reached for the biggest stem, the one that had started to wilt inward from the weight of being ignored. I'm keeping track, she said finally. If nothing else, for myself. One afternoon, Clara stopped by with a delivery, lavender oil she'd mixed for Delilah's pillowcases. Miles was working at the kitchen table, scowling at a worksheet labeled Biology Lab, Yeast Growth Variables. Need a break? Clara asked gently, placing the small bottle by the sink. I'm okay, he said, tapping his pencil against the edge of the table. I just don't get how it's growing faster when it's supposed to slow down. That's fermentation, Delilah called from the stove. Sometimes the right kind of warmth makes everything rise faster. Clara smiled. I could take him for a couple hours if you ever want a day off. Before Delilah could respond, Miles looked up sharply. Thanks, he said quickly, but I'd rather be with Grandma. Clara blinked, then nodded with a kind smile. Well, offer's there. Delilah turned away to hide the way her lips pressed together, grateful but also something else. A feeling she hadn't touched in years, something close to seen. That night, she logged the day like usual, but instead of just the hours and tasks, she added something new beneath the entry. Miles. I'd rather be with Grandma. She underlined it twice. Just as she finished writing, her phone buzzed again on the table. Cassie, he says you're helping too much. Please don't coddle him. It's affecting his tone with me. Delilah stared at the message for a long moment, then closed the phone without replying. Her hand moved back to the red notebook. She turned to a fresh page. The kitchen was quiet, save for the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock and the soft hum of the dishwasher winding down its cycle. Outside, rain tapped gently against the window panes, a welcome reprieve from Boise's dry stretch of late summer heat. Delilah sat at the breakfast table with a cup of chamomile cooling beside her elbow and a manila folder open in front of her. The document had yellowed slightly around the edges. She'd updated it every few years, quietly, responsibly, like replacing batteries in smoke detectors. The language was still clear, the signatures intact. Her own handwriting was in the margins, notes in pencil about bequests and contingencies, but one name sat too comfortably on too many lines: Cassandra Elaine Moore. Delilah's pen hovered for a moment and then, without hesitation, she uncapped a red felt-tip marker. A single stroke crossed out Cassie's name on the primary airline, another on the page that designated durable power of attorney, one more where Cassie was to receive the house in full and unrestricted access. Each line bled crimson. She circled the name at the top of the distribution list. A neat, decisive oval, Miles Andrew Moore. The marker clicked shut with a finality that echoed through the kitchen louder than it should have. Delilah placed it gently on the table, then closed the folder and held it against her chest for a long moment. Her hands were steady, her heart oddly light. Richard Lanning's office had that dry paper smell only older law firms had, the kind built before everything became glass and fake plants. It was tucked on the second floor of a 2-story brick building downtown, its windows shaded by faded navy awnings. Delilah arrived 10 minutes early, as always. Richard looked up from his desk when she entered, glasses perched low on his nose. "Ah," he said, standing with a grin. "You've got the look of a woman who's made up her mind." Delilah held up the manila folder. "Time to correct a mistake." He took the file with a nod and gestured toward the chair across from him. "Oh, good," he said, flipping the cover open. "I was hoping you'd say that." He skimmed the documents quickly, efficiently but with care, and made a small, satisfied noise when he saw the red circles. "You know, most people hesitate at this part. They second-guess, rationalize. You're not most people." Delilah gave a small smile. "I was once." He opened a new file on his computer and began typing. "We'll draw up a fresh document, add in the protective clause, file the rescission of the prior version. You'll want an enforceability shield in case of any challenge." "She will challenge," Delilah said quietly but without fear. "She'll try," Richard corrected, "and she'll fail." Delilah leaned back in the leather chair, her fingers resting on the arms like she'd just unburdened herself. Make it so airtight she could hire Noah's flood and still not squeeze in. Richard chuckled. "Now, that is a client directive I can work with." Nina arrived just before sunset, tracking bits of gravel from her garden clogs across the office floor. She pulled off her gloves as she entered, hair still tucked under a wide-brimmed straw hat. "Did I miss anything juicy?" "You're right on time," Richard said, nodding toward the stack of final papers. "Witness signature, bottom page." Nina scanned the documents briefly, then looked at Delilah with a raised brow. "Well, look who finally broke out the permanent marker." Delilah shrugged lightly. "Someone had to." Nina signed without hesitation. We all saw the brunch. Richard looked between the two women and slid the files into an envelope. All right. Filed, notarized, and in effect as of now. The estate, assets, and guardianship responsibilities will go to Miles. Cassandra Moore is no longer named or entitled in any capacity. The protective clause is ironclad. No contest. Delilah stood, smoothing the front of her jacket. That's the first time I've heard her full name spoken without apology. I can say it again, Richard offered, louder this time. Delilah laughed softly. No need. The silence in her inbox will say plenty. That evening, after dinner, Delilah placed the new folder in her fireproof box and locked it with a quiet click. She looked around the house, her house, with its warm wooden trim and sun-streaked windows and books lining every corner like friends too loyal to leave. She brewed herself a cup of mint tea, then sat on the front steps and watched the porch light flicker on. Crickets hummed low in the grass. A breeze lifted the edge of her sleeve. Her phone buzzed in her lap. Cassie, do you still have the papers I signed when Dad died? Need them for the refi paperwork. Delilah stared at the screen for a long time, her thumb hovering just above the keyboard. Then she did something she'd never done before. She deleted the message without replying. The morning air was unusually crisp for August, and Delilah welcomed it. She opened the windows wide, letting the breeze stir the linen curtains and carry the scent of the garden inside. The house exhaled with her, quiet, steady, relieved. At the kitchen table, the new will sat before her, freshly printed and thick with legal padding. Richard had emailed a final copy for her records, and she had printed it on her best ivory stock. The words were weighty in their finality, but also strangely elegant. Miles's name appeared again and again, like a steady drumbeat through the legalese. Executor, sole heir, beneficiary, guardian of trust. The manila folder from the past had been replaced by something firmer, more assured. This was not a maybe. This was a map. Delilah smoothed the corner of the document, her index finger pausing on a clause she'd insisted be added. No inheritance or asset shall be awarded to any individual who has demonstrated manipulative, negligent, or coercive behavior toward the testator, with examples documented. It was written in dry legal prose, but she knew exactly who it spoke to, and who it didn't. After breakfast, she wrote a check for $30,000 addressed to the Boise Public Literacy Initiative with a memo line that read, "In honor of those who teach by showing up." She placed it in an envelope with her own return address written in her careful script. Then, instead of leaving it in the mailbox, she drove it downtown and handed it directly to the receptionist at the city building. No press, no plaque, no speech, just intention. Richard filed the paperwork within the hour. "As of today," he said, voice crisp over the phone, "everything is in place, ironclad, and active." That afternoon, a bouquet arrived on Delilah's front step. White lilies, tall and unapologetic, nestled in a deep green vase. The note tucked among the stems was short, Nina's handwriting sharp and unmistakable. "No more parasites. Let the garden thrive. Punjay." Delilah placed the bouquet beside the window, where the late sunlight caught the petals and made them glow like something holy. She didn't hear it herself. Of course not. But word trickled through Nina, who heard it from Ruth at the garden center, who heard it from Elaine at the Pilates studio. Cassie had been at brunch, again, this time with two girlfriends from her networking circle. She was talking about Delilah's kitchen like it already belonged to her, Nina recounted over coffee, pushing a biscotti across the table like a peace offering. Told them she was going to knock down the pantry wall and put in marble waterfall counters, said it was a waiting game. Delilah stirred her tea. "She must think I'm already in the ground." "She thinks a lot of things," Nina said, then leaned back with a pointed look. "And you've given her every reason not to think otherwise." Delilah didn't argue. She had no need to correct illusions that would unravel themselves. That weekend, she had a locksmith out before sunrise. The man worked quietly, efficiently, replacing the deadbolts on every exterior door and updating the keypad on the garage. Delilah walked the perimeter with him afterward, checking camera angles and ensuring the system was synced to her phone. It felt less like paranoia and more like returning a set of keys she'd never meant to give away. She didn't tell Miles about the changes, just added his fingerprint to the front door lock and made sure he knew the code. "Emergency use only," she said. "This house is yours when you need it, but not to worry about yet." He looked at her curiously, but nodded, slipping his hands back into the hoodie he almost always wore these days. "Okay, Grandma." They walked the garden path that evening, just as the sky turned lavender over the foothills. Miles walked in quiet thoughtfulness, his feet brushing through the thyme that spilled over the stepping stones. Then he stopped suddenly. "Can I ask you something?" Delilah turned, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Of course." He hesitated, kicked at a pebble, then looked up. "Is Mom actually in your will?" The question didn't land like an accusation. It felt more like concern, or maybe a quiet knowing that had finally gathered enough courage to speak. "She acts like she's already in charge," Miles added, his voice quiet but edged with something that sounded almost like warning. Delilah didn't answer right away. She looked up at the sky instead, where one pale star had just begun to flicker. Delilah didn't look at Miles right away. She let the question sit between them, fragile and unfinished, like a note played on a string that hadn't quite stopped vibrating. The light was thinning over the garden. The pear tree at the edge of the yard cast long shadows across the path, the breeze tugging gently at its leaves. Miles shifted on his feet, waiting, not impatient, but open. He had always been like that with her, not pressing, just present. "One day," Delilah said softly, her voice as steady as the wind, "you'll understand." Miles gave a small nod, but the way his jaw tensed said he didn't believe her. Not yet. His eyes lingered on her face, searching for something she didn't intend to give. Then, as if sensing the end of the moment, he turned and continued down the path toward the porch. Delilah followed more slowly. The garden, for all its beauty, suddenly felt like a stage after the actors had exited, a little too quiet, a little too revealing. Inside, her phone buzzed twice from the side table. She almost ignored it. "Cassie, are you drinking enough water lately?" A pause, then another ping. "Cassie, found these supplements, great for women, our age. Magnesium, L-theanine, something for mood. Just a suggestion." There was a smiling face emoji after the word mood, the kind with rosy cheeks and closed eyes, as if to suggest concern and affection. Delilah stared at it for a long time. Then she locked the screen and set the phone face down. When she looked up, Nina was standing at the screen door, holding a mason jar of sun tea in one hand and a cardboard box under her other arm. "Your daughter is officially unwell," she said by way of greeting, letting the door creak open. "Sending you vitamins now?" Delilah raised an eyebrow. "I'm a woman of a certain age, Nina. Clearly that means my hydration needs supervision." Nina crossed the kitchen and dropped the box on the table. "I told you, she's not worried about your water intake. She's just weaponizing wellness." Delilah allowed herself a smile. "Well, that's a new chapter, from brunch shaming to biohacking." Nina unscrewed the lid from the jar and took a long drink. "What's next? Emotional support essential oils? Wait, don't answer that. You've probably already got those." Delilah reached into a drawer, pulled out a small glass bottle with a cream label and a navy ribbon tied at the neck. "Clara dropped this off today." She handed it to Nina, who examined the label. One word was handwritten in elegant cursive respect. Nina snorted. She bottled it. Finally. She said it's fig, saffron, and cedarwood. For boundaries. Nina gave the vial a theatrical sniff. "Smells like a locked door and a good lawyer." Delilah chuckled, then turned toward the window. Miles was out on the porch swing now, earbuds in, head tilted toward the fading sky. He tapped his foot lightly, off-beat, like someone trying to anchor himself. "I didn't answer him," she said quietly. Nina followed her gaze. "About the will?" Delilah nodded. "You didn't lie either," Nina said. "You gave him something better." Delilah didn't respond right away. She watched the boy on the swing, growing taller every month, his limbs stretching into something less childlike, but not yet burdened by the architecture of adulthood. "Not everything gets passed down," she murmured. "Some things are earned." "Damn right," Nina said, "like respect and real kitchen counters." They both laughed softly, but the quiet returned quickly, thoughtful, edged. Delilah walked to the cabinet and tucked the bottle of respect beside the others Clara had made for her. Each one had a story. Final draft, unshaken, springlight. This one felt different, though. This one felt like a threshold. Her phone buzzed again on the table. Cassie, can you send me a picture of your insurance information? I might put you on a new plan with Leo's provider. Better coverage for later years. Delilah read the message, then powered off the phone completely. Through the window, she watched as Miles swung forward slightly, then back, then stilled himself with both feet on the porch. He was looking at the door now, waiting. The brunch invitation arrived not as a warm text or a phone call, but as a calendar alert. Cassie had sent a digital invite with a location pin and the vague subject line, "Catch-up and future planning." Delilah didn't respond right away. She waited 2 days, then clicked accept, not because she intended to be agreeable, but because she wanted to be present, on her own terms. The cafe Cassie chose this time was trendier than the last, a place where glasses of cucumber water were pre-poured and the waitstaff wore branded baseball caps instead of aprons. The patio was filled with gold-plated cutlery and muted terracotta tones, as if it were trying to impersonate someone's idea of luxury. Delilah arrived in a navy blouse and her pearl earrings. She wore no makeup but had pressed her slacks and spritzed on Clara's respect. She didn't look rich or old. She looked exact. Cassie was already seated at a corner table, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up only briefly as her mother approached. "You made it," she said, then set her phone down beside a crisp manila folder and a rolled architectural draft tube with a plastic cap. Delilah eyed the items but sat without comment. "I got us oat lattes," Cassie chirped, "and they had that rustic toast you like. Avocado, heirloom tomato, sea salt." Delilah smiled politely. "How thoughtful." Cassie took a dainty bite, wiped her lip with a cloth napkin she'd probably brought from home, and reached for the folder. "I've been talking to a few agents," she began, sliding the folder open and revealing glossy real estate brochures with captions like "Sunset-ready potential" and "Unlock your nest egg." "You know, just thinking ahead, inventory's tight right now, so if we co-list soon, we could lock in top dollar before the next interest rate jump." Delilah sipped her latte. Cassie continued, tapping one photo with her nail. "And the kitchen's good bones, obviously, but I'd still recommend redoing the cabinetry before open house. You'd recoup like 90% of that cost, and it'd make the walkthroughs smoother when what?" Delilah interrupted, her voice clear but measured. "I'm still living in it." Cassie blinked, mid-pitch. Then she gave a tight little laugh, brushing it off with a wave. "Of course. I didn't mean now. I meant someday. Eventually. You know, just thinking strategically." "Strategically," Delilah echoed, not as a question but as a verdict. Cassie took another bite, then gestured at the draft tube. "These are just concepts. A friend from Leo's architecture firm mocked up a redesign. Open floor plan, 2 offices, soaking tub. I figured, when the time comes, it could be good to already have a vision in place." Delilah looked at the paper napkin under her teacup. A ring of condensation had started to bloom outward, slow and inevitable. "I admire your preparation," she said softly, setting down her cup, "but it seems you've drawn up an awful lot of plans for a home that isn't yours." Cassie tilted her head, smiling like someone caught on a podcast mic. "Don't be dramatic, Mom. You always said you wanted things to be simple." Delilah pushed her chair back gently and stood. Cassie frowned. "We haven't even talked about the investment account. Leo thinks—" "I'm not discussing this over toast," Delilah said, reaching for her bag. Cassie leaned back, folding her arms. "You're being emotional again." Delilah didn't reply. At the edge of the patio, a familiar Subaru idled at the curb. Nina was in the driver's seat, sunglasses on, radio playing low. When Delilah opened the passenger door, Nina didn't say anything. She just nodded once, pulled a to-go cup from the console, and handed it over like she'd been expecting this exact outcome. Delilah took one last look back toward the cafe. Through the tinted glass, Cassie sat alone now, scrolling once again through her phone, her mouth pressed in a hard line. You want the scenic route or the short one? Nina asked, merging into traffic. Neither, Delilah said. I want the quiet one. They drove for a while without speaking, Boise's mid-morning traffic already thinning. The latte was still warm in her hands. Back at home, Delilah stepped inside, dropped her keys in the bowl by the door, and pulled out the red leather notebook. She flipped to a blank page, paused, and wrote in calm cursive, "Brunch number 2, left early, mid-sentence." She capped the pen, no further comment. It was nearly dusk when Miles knocked on the screen door, not bothering to text first. He'd stopped asking if he could come over. Delilah had made it clear long ago that her door didn't require appointments. She was in the kitchen, shelling peas into a wide ceramic bowl, her sleeves rolled neatly to the elbow. She didn't look up when she said, "There's lemonade in the fridge and cookies cooling on the rack. Take what you need." Miles moved quietly, grabbing a glass and a cookie before settling into the wooden stool near the counter. He watched her for a moment, then pulled something folded and crumpled from his hoodie pocket. Delilah didn't ask, but she waited. He slid the paper across the counter. She didn't reach for it. "What is it?" she asked, still working the peas from their pods with quiet precision. He gave a half shrug. "Talking points. Mom gave them to me. Said it would keep things from getting emotionally messy." He paused, then added, "She made me write them out in front of her." Delilah wiped her hands and finally picked up the paper. "Ask about her pain levels. Remind her you're worried about her fall risk. Say you'd feel more stable if she lived closer to family, us. Mention that Leo's mom has offered resources we can all share." There was more, but Delilah stopped reading. She folded the paper slowly, deliberately, and passed it back to him without a word. Miles looked down at it for a long time, then ripped it cleanly in half, once, twice, again. He didn't crumple the pieces. He left them in a neat little pile beside the lemonade. Delilah leaned on the counter with her forearms and said, "You're allowed to say no to anyone." Miles didn't answer, but something shifted in his face. A recognition, maybe even relief. "I'm 16, he said after a moment. "She still talks like I'm 5. "She talks like you're an accessory," Delilah replied gently. "But you're not. You're a whole person." He nodded slowly. Then he took another cookie and said nothing else for a while. Later that week, Delilah met Richard at his office again. This time, the file she brought was labeled in her handwriting, "Living Trust, Miles." Richard read through it, expression unreadable. "You're assigning him as trustee?" he asked. "At 16? Delilah sat with her hands folded, calm and deliberate. "Contingent. If something happens to me and he's of legal age by then, you'll serve in interim, but I want him named." Richard nodded slowly, his pen tapping once against the table. "You're serious?" "I've never been more." He looked up at her then. "He's going to carry this well." "I know," she said, and that was the only answer needed. That Saturday, Clara appeared just before noon with a cardboard tray of lemon scones and a shy request. "I know it's short notice," she said, standing at Delilah's porch, sunlight painting soft lines on her arms. "But my assistant bailed on me again. I've got a dozen new samples to sort and 0 help." Delilah raised an eyebrow. "This sounds like a subtle internship pitch." Clara grinned. "Think Miles would want to hang out with essential oils and maybe get paid in sugar and store credit?" Inside, Miles, who'd heard the last part, answered before Delilah could. "I'm in." He helped Clara load her trunk, careful with the fragile glass bottles. Before they drove off, Clara handed Delilah a folded note, ink still slightly damp. "He has excellent instincts and gentle hands. That's rare. See." That night, Delilah found a small box on her porch from Nina. Inside were 3 giant cookies wrapped in wax paper and labeled in Sharpie, "For the future adult, Nina." Delilah laughed so suddenly she startled herself. She took 1 cookie, left the rest for Miles, and added a new entry in her notebook. Saturday, lemon scones, Clara's invitation, Nina's cookies. Miles said yes to all 3. She capped the pen. Then her phone buzzed on the counter. "Cassie, Leo's been acting distant lately? You poisoning him against me now?" There was no emoji this time. Delilah didn't reply. She simply turned her phone face down, walked into the garden, and sat in the gathering twilight, the scent of cedarwood and fresh mint rising around her. The waiting room at St. Luke's Memory and Neurological sat like a holding pen for suspicion. Magazines no one wanted to read, faux plants, a digital wall clock ticking too loudly. Delilah sat upright in the molded plastic chair, her handbag tucked neatly at her side, and her posture betraying not even a whisper of nerves. Across from her, an older man was arguing with a receptionist about a billing code. She barely noticed. Her attention was on the clipboard in her lap, a brief history intake she'd already completed in full, double-checked for grammar. The test itself had been long, deliberate, pattern recognition, logical sequencing, recall from short stories read aloud in a flat, clinical voice, drawing a clock, naming vegetables, reciting proverbs. The psychologist administering it had been kind but careful, scribbling in shorthand and glancing too often at the wall-mounted timer. When it was over, she walked out without waiting for affirmation. She didn't need it. By Monday, Richard had the results in hand. "Near perfect," he said, laying the report across his desk. "Verbal reasoning in the 95th percentile, attention and memory both stable, no impairments. You scored higher than I did on 2 of these." Delilah gave a modest shrug. "Well, I've been practicing logic games in the mornings. Keeps the tea from tasting bitter." Richard laughed and slid a second file toward her. "I've already sent the notarized will, the trust documents, and now this assessment to the probate court. Just in time, too." Delilah raised an eyebrow. He leaned back. "Cassie filed an emergency petition last Friday. Claims concern over your executive function and personal decision-making capabilities. She's requesting conservatorship. Says you've become erratic, that she fears for your well-being." Delilah didn't blink. "I see. She's basing it on the fact you've limited contact and refused to share your financials," he continued, "which in legal terms is called being a grown adult." By 3:17 p.m. that afternoon, the petition was officially denied. The court clerk called Richard directly. "Judge thought it was absurd," she said. "Didn't even warrant a hearing. He added a note to the record, baseless and inappropriate." Richard printed it out for Delilah anyway. "For your scrapbook," he joked. Delilah folded it once and tucked it into her red notebook. That evening, Nina brought over a bottle of non-alcoholic cider and 3 mismatched glasses. They stood in Delilah's kitchen, the back door open to the cool evening, and toasted quietly over the stove while a berry cobbler warmed in the oven. "To your brain," Nina said, raising her glass. "May it outlive your patience." Delilah clinked her glass gently against hers. To the judge. "May his inbox stay unpolluted." They both laughed. Nina poured another splash. "She must be livid." "She won't stop here," Delilah said calmly. "She's just warming up." Nina set her glass down. "Let her sweat. Every move she makes just sharpens the contrast." The next morning, Delilah and Miles stopped by the city library for a local author reading. A few retirees, a smattering of parents, and one bored toddler circled the courtyard. Delilah wore her lavender cardigan. Miles wore a faded T-shirt from a science camp he claimed to hate but had never thrown out. They stood together near the back, sipping lemonade from paper cups. As the reading ended, the crowd clapped, then began to disperse. Miles suddenly turned toward her. "Hey," he said, and before she could answer, he pulled her into a hug. Not one of those awkward, chin-over-the-shoulder teenage hugs, but a full, anchored embrace. In public. No hesitation. Delilah froze for a breath, then melted into it. Her arms wrapped around him, steady and sure. Someone nearby smiled. A librarian took a photo for the city's newsletter. He didn't let go right away. When he did, he said, "I just wanted to do that. No reason." Delilah blinked twice to clear her vision. "Well, thank you," she whispered. She thought that moment would carry her through the weekend. She was wrong. That night, Richard called, his voice low, clipped. "I just got an email from opposing counsel. Cassie's filed a preliminary claim." Delilah's stomach tightened. "What kind?" "She's alleging Miles has exerted emotional coercion over you, that his presence has disrupted your mental clarity and compromised your independent decision-making." Delilah sat down slowly. "She's trying to discredit her own son?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "She's trying to reverse the tide," Richard said, "and she's starting to drown." Delilah stared into the dark kitchen. The boy had hugged her without asking, and somehow Cassie thought that was a crime. The notice arrived by certified mail. Delilah signed for it at the door in her garden gloves, a smear of potting soil still on her wrist. She didn't open it right away. She set it on the counter beside the bowl of lemons she'd been meaning to juice, washed her hands, and finished pruning the rest of the rosemary on the porch. Only then did she slit the envelope open with the same letter opener she'd once used to read Miles's hand-drawn birthday cards. Inside, a formal petition to the family court of Ada County filed by Cassandra Elaine Moore. Language filled with bolded phrases like undue influence, manipulative dependency, and diminished capacity exacerbated by adolescent proximity. Delilah stared at it for a long time. Then she exhaled slowly, folded the letter back into its envelope, and placed it on top of the red leather notebook like it had been earned. She texted Richard, "It's here. Let's prepare accordingly." His reply came almost instantly. "Already started. We're going to bury this thing in receipts." By the following Monday, Richard had built a wall of defense taller than anything Cassie could scale. He submitted the notarized will, the sealed capacity report, and a full paper trail of every communication between Delilah and Miles over the past 6 months. Every journal entry, calendar event, grocery list, and annotated homework packet. Clara provided a written affidavit detailing her time with both Delilah and Miles. Nina signed a sworn statement about the brunch incident, the Venmo request, and the unsolicited planning documents. They even included the photo from the library courtyard, Miles hugging Delilah in plain view of the public, surrounded by smiling strangers, and looking like anything but a mastermind of coercion. The case never reached a hearing. The judge's dismissal came with a single sentence. "This petition appears retaliatory, lacks merit, and misrepresents the facts of both relationships in question." No gavel, no cross-examination. Just a courtroom that refused to dignify Cassie's spiral. When Delilah shared the ruling with Miles, he didn't say anything right away. He just let out a slow breath, folded the printed email in half, and tucked it into his math textbook. Later that afternoon, he found Clara behind the shop, sweeping petals off the back porch. She looked up, and before she could ask, he reached into his hoodie pocket and held out a small key ring. "What's this?" she asked, already smiling. He shrugged. "You said once I could use the place when I needed quiet. Just making it official." Clara took the key gently, turned it over, and handed it right back. "Then it belongs with you." He tucked it into his palm, nodded, and walked back toward the garden center with the calm of someone who'd just been trusted to hold something breakable, and planned not to drop it. Meanwhile, Delilah sat in her sunroom, a small glass of elderflower cordial sweating beside her. On the coffee table, her final will and trust, open to the explanatory addendum she'd never quite finished. The letter she had always meant to write but never needed, until now. She uncapped her pen. "To whom it may concern. This is not a document of regret. This is a document of record. My decisions were not made in grief, confusion, or under the influence of sentiment. They were made in clarity, after observation, in response to patterns that repeated long after they should have stopped." She wrote for an hour, not from anger, not even from pain, but from memory and precision. She folded the letter carefully, slid it into the final section of the trust binder, and sealed the file shut with a brass clip. The next morning, she handed the envelope to Nina with a cup of black coffee and a quiet request. "Deliver this to Richard, personally." Nina nodded without opening it. "Want me to add a lily?" "Let's not pretend it's a funeral," Delilah said. "It's a release." That afternoon, as she watered her planters, her phone lit up on the porch rail. Cassie again. "So now I'm being erased? Great. Guess Leo will find out everything soon. Hope you're ready for the fallout." Delilah didn't respond. Instead, she picked up the watering can and moved to the next row of mint, where the leaves were already turning toward the sun. The final message from Cassie came at 6:12 a.m. No greeting, no punctuation, Just 4 words that blinked across Delilah's lock screen like an alarm that had slept through its own purpose. "You'll regret this eventually." Delilah sat in bed, the early light filtering through linen curtains, and stared at the screen for a long, still moment. Then she opened the settings menu and blocked the number. No reply. No farewell. No need for ceremony. Over the next hour, she did the same with Cassie's email, social profiles, even the shared grocery app that had sat untouched since spring. It wasn't rage, it was maintenance. A pruning, long overdue. Later that morning, Richard received her signed request for a cease and desist order detailing digital harassment, false legal claims, and emotional intimidation. He filed it that afternoon, along with a formal statement that Cassie Moore was no longer welcome to contact Delilah Moore in any form for any reason until further notice. By Thursday, Cassie tried to call from a different number. Delilah didn't answer. On Friday, she showed up in person. It was just past noon when Nina's garden camera picked it up. Cassie, stepping out of a silver crossover SUV in oversized sunglasses and workout clothes, too polished to have seen a drop of sweat. She didn't knock. She walked around the side of the house and tried the back gate. It didn't open. She rattled it once, twice, then leaned over the fence shouting, "Mom, I know you're home. I saw your car." Nina was already halfway across her own yard with her phone out. "Hi there," she called, in a tone usually reserved for Girl Scouts and solicitor warnings. "You're being recorded. I'm asking you to leave." Cassie turned sharply. "You can't seriously be—" "You're trespassing," Nina said calmly. "You've been warned before." Within 10 minutes, a Boise PD cruiser pulled onto the street. An officer stepped out, clipboard in hand, sunglasses reflecting the flat summer glare. He didn't argue. He simply read the official warning aloud and had Cassie sign a copy. Delilah watched it all from inside, the edge of her curtain pinched between her fingers. She didn't flinch. She didn't wave. She just watched. As the cruiser pulled away and Cassie's SUV followed with a screech, Delilah finally let the curtain fall. The next morning, she began something new. At precisely 7:03 a.m., she filled the kettle, set her favorite classical record on the old turntable in the den, and walked barefoot into the garden with her coffee in hand. The Bach cello suite hummed from inside the house, slow and steady, wrapping around the vines like silk. She moved methodically, checking basil for aphids, brushing away a rogue beetle on the tomatoes, pulling one weed with a swift tug and letting the roots hang like trophies in her fingers. The air was cool. The silence was full. She didn't check her phone once. By the end of the week, it had become a ritual. Coffee, Bach garden, no news, no noise, no one else's timeline dictating the pace of her day. Even Miles noticed. "You've gone full monk," he said one evening, watching her from the porch. Delilah glanced up from trimming time. "I've gone full free." He grinned. "Better." He sat beside her, one leg swinging, a little less guarded than usual. Then he pulled out his phone and fiddled with the settings for a moment. "What are you doing?" she asked, amused. "Changing my voicemail," he said. "You inspired me." She raised an eyebrow. He tapped the mic and recorded in a low, even voice. "Hi, it's Miles. Leave a message, unless you're my mom." "Then don't." He hit save without hesitation. Delilah let out a startled laugh, the kind that slips out before it can be softened. "That might be a little harsh," she said, though her tone was more proud than concerned. Miles shrugged. "She called my counselor this week, said you were altering my worldview." "Are you sure I'm not?" He looked at her for a long beat, then said quietly, "I hope you are." That night, as the record crackled and the garden swayed beneath a waning moon, Delilah picked up her red notebook and wrote a single sentence. "She said I'd regret this." Then, beneath it, with a firmer hand, "I don't." The second test felt easier than the first. Not because the questions had changed, they hadn't, but because Delilah now understood the choreography of doubt, how it moved, how it tried to sneak into the room in a lab coat and glasses and call itself concern. She sat beneath the same sterile ceiling, the same hum of artificial air. The clinician was younger this time, but polite. Her voice was calm, her tone unobtrusive. Delilah didn't bristle. She answered each prompt with clarity, completed every sequence, and, when asked to recall a story involving two sisters and a missing ring, added a line the script hadn't included, just to see if anyone was paying attention. They were. An hour later, she stepped out into full sun, keys already in hand. Her steps didn't quicken, they didn't need to. Richard called her the next morning. "Flawless again," he said. "Technically above average for your age bracket, but I assume you already knew that." "I had a hunch," she replied, buttering a slice of toast. "File it with the rest, and seal it." "Done. It's now a permanent affidavit, attached to your will, trust, and legal correspondence. You are officially, in legal terms, undiminished." Delilah chuckled. "Not the sexiest adjective I've earned, but I'll take it." Later that week, Clara stopped by with a new bottle, this one smaller than the rest. No ribbon, just a clean glass cylinder and a hand-lettered label pressed neatly against the glass. Unshaken. Delilah turned it in her hands. "I thought that one was already in your collection." Clara shook her head. "It wasn't finished, not until now." She opened the cap and let the scent breathe into the room. Green cardamom, black tea, a trace of burned sugar, and cedar. Delilah inhaled, eyes half closing. "It smells like boundaries." "It smells like you," Clara said, and kissed her lightly on the temple. On Friday, Nina sent her a link with no subject line. Delilah opened it in her garden, sitting cross-legged beneath the lilac tree with a chipped mug of cold coffee balanced on her knee. The headline read, "The Slow Theft, What Elder Manipulation Really Looks Like." There were no names, no towns, no direct accusations, just a narrative woven from threads that sounded eerily familiar. Brunch debt, unsolicited planning, wellness advice disguised as control. She read every word. At the bottom, submitted anonymously by someone who finally watched a friend stop apologizing. Delilah smiled. She didn't need to guess. That Sunday, the house was silent. Miles had gone to help Clara with the afternoon rush, something about a pop-up stand near the Saturday market. Delilah had already watered the garden, prepped soup for the week, and set the classical record to side B. But something tugged at her. She moved to the den and retrieved a small black camera from the desk drawer. It had been Miles's years ago, back when digital meant freedom and not surveillance. She set it on the mantel, checked the angle, and pressed record. She didn't script it. She didn't plan the words. She simply spoke. About how life softens when you let it. How family is not an inheritance but a series of choices. How love, even when rejected, can outlast resentment if it's made of something strong enough. She explained her decisions, plainly, calmly, with no malice. Just math, just years, just reality, organized. She ended with a smile. "If you're watching this," she said, "it means you've reached adulthood, which means you're allowed to build things your own way. I only hope you use what I've given you not as a finish line, but as a foundation. The rest belongs to you." She powered the camera off, removed the memory card, and slipped it into a small gray envelope labeled in her neat, steady hand. "Miles, 18. Open on your own time." Then she walked it to the fireproof box and sealed it inside. No backup, no password, just faith. That evening, while slicing apples for tart dough, her phone vibrated once across the counter. Cassie again, this time from a burner email address, hidden sender, no subject line. The message was short, "You've poisoned him against me. You'll die alone." Delilah didn't respond. She didn't even pause. Instead, she brushed cinnamon across the apple slices, slid the tart into the oven, and turned on a cello suite loud enough to drown out everything but the sound of her own piece. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of overcast afternoon that seemed to press gently against the windows, offering quiet rather than gloom. Delilah had just returned from her usual walk through the neighborhood, longer than necessary, slower than expected. She liked the stillness it gave her body afterward. She was setting her keys in the bowl by the door when she heard it, the muffled wheels of a suitcase against the walkway, a sound too familiar from old vacations, delayed flights, and all the times she'd watched Cassie move in and out of her own obligations like a revolving door. She stepped to the front window. Cassie stood at the porch's edge, hair unbrushed, lips cracked from what looked like too much sun and too little water. A suitcase beside her, one of the expensive hardshell kinds. Red. Delilah didn't move. The doorbell rang, once, then again. No urgency, just insistence. Delilah opened the door. She didn't step back. Cassie looked smaller up close. Not physically, she was still in her heels, still dressed in her usual wellness casual uniform, but there was something unraveled around the edges. Her mascara had flaked beneath one eye. Her breathing was uneven. She didn't say hello. "I need a place to breathe," Cassie said. Delilah's hand rested lightly on the doorknob. "Then I hope you find one." Cassie shifted her weight. "Mom, I'm serious." "I can see that." Cassie's voice cracked. "It was just one moment. One bad month. I was stressed." Delilah blinked once, then let the stillness gather around her words. "And I was your pillow." Cassie hesitated. "What?" "I was the thing you landed on, every time. I was your cushion, your pause button, your apology sponge. You dropped your weight on me so often you never checked to see if I could still breathe." She paused, voice steady. "You suffocated me." Cassie's lips parted, as if to argue, then closed again. The suitcase sat awkwardly between them, like a prop from a scene both women had outgrown. Cassie whispered, "Where am I supposed to go?" Delilah tilted her head slightly. "Somewhere you haven't burned." A voice called from just beyond the hedges. "I'd recommend a Holiday Inn." Cassie turned sharply. Nina stood halfway up the front steps, arms crossed, keys in hand, garden clogs covered in dirt, expression flat. "This porch doesn't do guilt trips anymore. We repaved." Cassie opened her mouth. "Don't," Nina warned. "You won't like how I finish the sentence for you." Delilah didn't say a word. Cassie stood frozen for a breath longer. Then, without so much as a blink of thanks, she wheeled the suitcase off the step, one hard jerk at a time. No backward glance, no apology, just the rhythm of wheels scraping over gravel. Delilah closed the door, not loudly, not softly, just enough to mark the moment. 2 days later, Delilah stood in front of the city library, arms folded lightly across her chest, as a small crowd gathered near the sidewalk. The mayor was there, and a few local council members, milling about with scripted smiles and small applause cues. At the edge of the curb sat the familiar blue and white bus she had quietly funded months ago, once faded, now shining. New paint, new panels. A mural of children reading beneath a watercolor tree wrapped around the back. She hadn't come for the ceremony. She didn't like microphones or dedications. But she stayed long enough to see the new vinyl lettering across the side panel. The Delilah Moore Mobile Library, powered by books, rooted in choice. Clara nudged her shoulder. "You okay?" Delilah kept her eyes on the lettering. "I thought they weren't going to name it." "They weren't," Clara smiled. "The board voted last week. Unanimous." "I never asked for that." "You didn't have to." Clara handed her a program. On the back was a quote she didn't recognize at first, then realized it was her own. Taken from her will video. "Family isn't an inheritance. It's a series of choices." Behind them, Nina held up her phone to take a picture but lowered it just as quickly. "This one's for your notebook," she said. Delilah's gaze lingered on the bus one more moment, then turned away. She didn't need the photo. The whole thing was already imprinted where it mattered. The ribbon was yellow, not gold, not ceremonial, just a soft daffodil yellow that fluttered slightly in the summer breeze. Clara had tied it herself. She said yellow felt like books, like buttered toast, like new beginnings without fanfare. The Delilah Moore Mobile Library sat parked at the edge of Riverbend Park, gleaming in morning light. Someone had strung paper bunting between two shade trees, a local bluegrass. Trio played soft, sun-warmed chords. Nothing about the event felt official. It felt like something the neighborhood had grown, the way a garden grows, slow, steady, and quietly beautiful. Delilah stood beside the ribbon, a clipboard in one hand, sunglasses hiding most of her expression. She wore a linen dress and her leather sandals. Clara had dabbed a bit of unshaken on her wrist before they left the house. Miles was already helping children up the bus steps, guiding them past the book carts with the easy confidence of someone who belonged. A girl in a strawberry print dress asked where the mystery section was. He didn't hesitate. Back left, second shelf, look for the red stickers. His grin was unguarded. Delilah watched him laugh at a toddler's mispronunciation of library and felt her chest expand with something quieter than pride, something like peace. Across the lawn, Clara stood by a folding table, handing out perfume samples in tiny tissue-wrapped pouches. Each one had a handwritten label: Respect, Springlight, Unshaken. Parents smiled as they took them. Some leaned in, whispering thanks. One woman teared up, tucking the vial into her bra like it was sacred. Nina sat beneath a wide sun hat on the front row of folding chairs, oversized sunglasses perched just enough to hide the watery glint behind them. She'd brought a thermos of iced tea and a folding fan shaped like a lemon wedge. Every few minutes she fanned herself once, then stopped, as if remembering she was trying not to cry. When the microphone crackled on, Delilah didn't flinch. She stepped forward, no notes in hand. "Thank you for being here," she began, her voice low but clear, wrapped in the hush that fell across the crowd. "This library on wheels began with a thought I had during a season when the world felt smaller and my voice felt quieter. I wanted to give something that didn't ask to be owed." She let the silence settle. "Sometimes," she said, her eyes drifting to the children by the steps, "love doesn't look like sacrifice or endurance. Sometimes love means knowing when to stop giving, so that others can learn to ask themselves what they truly need and what they don't." There was no applause. Not at first. Just stillness. Then slowly a hand clap. Another. A ripple of sound, soft and genuine, spreading through the park like the first pages of a book being turned in tandem. Delilah stepped down from the makeshift stage. Nina rose without a word and placed a hand over her shoulder, firm and warm. "You really said it," Nina murmured. "I did. About time." They both turned to watch Miles emerge from the bus, a little boy on his shoulders giggling as he tried to place a cardboard crown on Miles's head. The crown slipped, landing crooked. Neither of them cared. 17 blocks away, on a sun-baked bus stop bench beside a chain pharmacy, Cassie sat alone. She wore gym clothes that hadn't seen a gym, hair pulled back into something too intentional to be called casual. A tablet rested on her lap, tilted just enough to catch the live stream glare. The ribbon cutting was already over. The camera panned to the crowd. Miles laughing, Clara offering hugs, Nina raising her glass in a mock toast with a group of teenage volunteers. Then the camera paused briefly on the name painted across the bus's side. The Delilah Moore Mobile Library, powered by books, rooted in choice. Cassie zoomed in. Her thumb hovered, trembled, then tapped the screen once. Paused. She stared at the image, frozen now. That name, her mother's name, affixed not to a tombstone or foundation or family plaque, but to something moving, something chosen by others. Her mouth twitched, not a smile, not quite anger either, just something shapeless and small. Around her, the city moved on. Cars passing, earbuds in ears, conversations not involving her. A woman sat beside her on the bench, unaware, unbothered. The woman pulled a library card from her purse, checking the number scrawled on the back. Cassie closed the tablet. She said nothing, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't hit send. The garden had begun its late summer quiet. The bees were slower now, fuller in their flight, tracing lazy arcs from bloom to bloom. The lavender had faded to gray lilac, the rosemary was thick with needles, and the thyme spilled stubbornly across the path as if it refused to stay in its lane. Delilah moved through it like she always did. Measured steps, soft soles, a cotton shawl draped over her shoulders. She didn't carry scissors or gloves today, just a ceramic mug half full of now cool coffee and the hum of cello music in her mind. Miles walked beside her, slightly ahead but always within reach. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence, taller now, more angular, had grown into something that took up space without demanding it. They turned the corner near the trellis, where honeysuckle had begun to thread itself into the wire with quiet ambition. The gravel path curved toward the bench under the pear tree, her favorite place. The bench wasn't symmetrical. It leaned slightly to one side, the result of too many winters and not enough maintenance. But it held its shape. It held her. She sat first. Miles followed. They didn't look at each other. The breeze was light, just enough to move the shawl against her arm and stir the faintest hint of cedar and tea in the air. Clara's unshaken, now so familiar it felt like her own pulse. For a long moment, the only sound was the rustle of leaves overhead, brushing against each other like they had secrets to keep. Then, without turning, Miles leaned gently against her shoulder. Not the whole weight, just enough. Delilah didn't stiffen. She didn't even breathe differently. She simply shifted her hand until her fingers rested lightly over his knee and left them there. No words passed between them. The silence, for once, felt whole. From somewhere near the back gate, a screen door creaked open. Then Nina's voice, "God, you two are depressing." Delilah smiled without opening her eyes. Nina appeared in the clearing like she always did, unsummoned, irreverent, and entirely welcome. She held 2 mason jars of lemonade in one hand and a folded magazine in the other. "Didn't know this was a eulogy picnic," she added, setting one jar down on the bench's armrest. Miles didn't move. His head still rested against Delilah's shoulder. Nina stopped in front of them, tilted her sunglasses down, and grinned. "That bad, huh?" Delilah opened one eye and raised her eyebrows. "We're meditating," Nina snorted. "You're napping vertical." She dropped the magazine onto the nearby stone ledge and sat on the grass with a dramatic exhale. "By the way, I saw a bumper sticker this morning that said, 'Get in, loser. We're going healing.' Nearly crashed the car." Delilah laughed softly. Miles did too, just a puff of air. But it was there. "I brought lemonade," Nina added, "because I'm a saint, or codependent. Jury's out." The breeze kicked up slightly, pulling the scent of lemon rind and earth through the garden. Somewhere behind them, a wind chime offered a single accidental note. Nina lay back fully now, knees bent, sunglasses tipped over her face like a sunbathing actress. "If anyone needs me, I'm emotionally available between now and exactly 4 p.m. No one answered. They didn't need to. The sun shifted a few degrees higher. The leaves flickered gold where light filtered through. The air was rich with stillness and something softer than nostalgia. Delilah leaned her head back against the bench and let her gaze trace the way the branches split above them, like arteries, like choices. Beside her, Miles had closed his eyes. Clara's perfume still lingered faintly in the air, her signature now a kind of atmosphere. Delilah imagined the vials she kept on the shelf at home, all labeled in Clara's cursive, "Respect, Springlight, Final Draft, Unshaken." They'd never made one for grief or for letting go. But perhaps this was it. The wind. The weight of a head on her shoulder. The absence of noise. She didn't miss the hugs that had once felt conditional. The tight, brittle ones offered at brunches, on holidays, with cameras watching. She didn't miss the performance of intimacy. This one, the one given without demand, without apology or expectation, was the only one that had ever asked nothing of her. And so it meant everything. Later, when she returned to her notebook, she opened to a blank page. She didn't title it. She simply wrote the final line, as it had come to her. She rolled her eyes, so I rolled on, gracefully and alone. Then she closed the book and went back outside.